My anger was unbelievable at how I had been duped for this length of time, and the anguish which was unnecessary.
Anyone who knew during all of those years never told Alice Olson the real story of her husband's death. She would discover it by accident more than 2 decades later. In essence, it was a 22-year-long cover-up. Thornwell, as reported on ABC last January, was an Army private stationed in Orléans, France. Classified documents were missing from his unit. Thornwell became a suspect. His 2.5-month interrogation included administration of sodium pentothal, hypnosis, isolation, and deprivation of sleep. Army documents obtained by ABC News refer to this interrogation as conventional. Despite the severe questioning, Army intelligence was getting nowhere with Thornwell, and it was decided to slip him LSD. For 16 years, Thornwell never knew what had hit him. Tell me about the acid.
I'd rather not. It's a bad trip. It's a bad trip. That was a bad trip. The pain was so excruciating. It felt like somebody was sticking me with 1,000,000 pins. You know, just everywhere. Oh, it just...
You want to stop for me?
Oh. I walked around.
You want to stop?
Oh, I can talk. I lived through it. I lived through it.
No charges were ever brought by the Army against Thornwell. He was discharged for psychological disorders. But an Army psychiatric evaluation of Thornwell obtained by ABC News, one which was done prior to Thornwell having been given LSD, says of him, fairly cooperative, oriented, alert, and gave no evidence of psychosis or depression. From the Army's point of view, this type of LSD interrogation was a success. Val Orlico of Winnipeg, Canada, the wife of a member of the Canadian Parliament, was a patient of Dr. Cameron's. She entered the Allen Memorial Institute because of severe depression. She describes for the first time publicly the LSD therapy and psychic driving treatment that she was given by Dr. Cameron.
And then the drug began to take hold very rapidly because it was an IV injection. And things became very furry and very frightening, and had a lot of sensations that it's very difficult to recall. Nobody explained it to me. Nobody ever asked me if I was willing to do it or anything. I thought this was the coldest and most impersonal treatment that anybody could give to anybody in the world. And I became more and more despondent and more angry. I just became so despondent that I thought I can't live like this any longer. And I thought I would just go out and throw myself underneath the cars on McGregor. I stood on the curb of that street and I stood there and I thought, okay, go. And then I thought, what if you're not killed? What if you're just maimed? What if you don't die and you live and you can't even talk anymore? And I couldn't do it.
The most severe technique Cameron used was depatterning. He described it as breaking up the existing patterns of behavior by means of intensive electroshock therapy with prolonged periods of sleep. He carried out these experiments in something he called the sleep rooms.
People in there were like babies. They cried and they were very disoriented. And we were very afraid of the sleep room. We used to walk very carefully against the side of the corridor that was opposite the sleep room with our backs to the wall when we'd go by. But damn it all, I could have maybe had a different kind of life. And that makes me angry and sad, and I don't know how to explain how I feel, really. I'm just...
How did you feel when you learned that Dr. Cameron's experimentation was financed by the CIA?
Well, I thought, Oh, I can't even use the word that I thought, because I thought, that bastard. And he was too smart. He knew who he was working for. And, excuse me, but I just can't, sometimes I can't believe it. And yet I know it's true.
If you had the opportunity to say something to the people at the Central Intelligence Agency who financed this study, what would you say?
I realize the CIA is a very important organization and they have a very important job to do. But God, it surely doesn't have to be done on people who are totally incapable of knowing what's happening or having any defense against it. And I can't imagine the mentality of people who would do this. I just can't.
I was there for a while. I thought, I don't want to stay here. And I started to run away from the hospital, and they grabbed me, and then they put me on sleep treatment. And they kept you asleep for 23 days. And while I was asleep, they were shocking the heck out of me with electric shocks and playing tapes just over and over. I don't know what was on the tapes yet, but we're going to find out what was on the tapes through hypnosis.
It had a great effect on my life. I mean, I have been sick before, and I've had treatment, but there were never any experience I had was like that I had in 59.
I've never been able to sleep without medication since the sleep treatment. I went through years and years and years of severe depressions. I dream about it. All my waking hours, I think about it. It's eating me up. It really is.
I mean, if he was doing it and knew what he was doing for the benefit of the CIA, then I don't agree with this at all. I mean, why pick on me or anybody else? I don't like that.
It leaves me completely stunned. I don't know if I'll ever recover from it.
We are not professing to tell you the complete story of these activities. We are professing to tell you the complete story that we know. Right. But these records that we've uncovered don't tell the story. They tell pieces of it.
What in the world were they looking for with the magic mushrooms?
I think the best answer to that is that they were looking for fundamental information on compounds that would be capable of causing changes in behavior, changes in mental attitude.
Did you ever consider what would have happened if any of these substances were given to, say, unwitting people?
Oh, I don't remember having considered that specifically.
What if you... I trust perhaps you've thought about it.
Well, I haven't worried about it. Your question again, what would I have thought had I known that
any of these substances
would have been given to
unwitting persons?
You mean a hostile agent of another government?
No, I mean
that was probably one of the things I had in mind.
I mean testing it out on an American citizen.
I guess I must seem very, very cold-blooded about this, but I don't recall ever having been very much preoccupied with that issue.
And suddenly, there was the counterculture of the 60s.
I give the CIA a total credit for sponsoring and initiating the entire consciousness movement, counterculture events of the 1960s.
Dr. Timothy Leary, the 1960s Johnny Appleseed of LSD.
The CIA funded and supported and encouraged hundreds of young psychiatrists to experiment with this drug. The fallout from that was that the young psychologists began taking it themselves, discovering that it was an intelligence-enhancing, consciousness-raising experience.
Olson left behind a widow, Alice, and 3 children, but it would be years before they learned the real story of his death. Shortly after his suicide, Alice Olson was visited by Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, the man who had administered the drug, and by Robert Lashbrook, his deputy, who was the last person with Frank Olson the night of his death.
It was probably to check me out and see whether I was handling myself and handling the situation, whether I was hysterical. And I'm sure they left the house feeling ever so much better because I had been gracious and hospitable to them, so that I must have played right into their hand and made them feel fine.
The case of this man, Harold Blower, a tennis pro, seen here with his daughter Elizabeth, is well known. In 1953, Blower was a private patient at the New York State Psychiatric Institute. He was given 5 injections of a mescaline derivative that was being tested secretly for the Army Chemical Corps. With the 5th injection, Harold Blower died. As with the Olson case, a 22-year cover-up followed, until finally the Army admitted the real details of Blower's death. As a layperson, perhaps you can enlighten me. What therapeutic effect would the type of experiment that I just described have on a patient?
Well, the therapeutic effect would be indirect.
Was this patient aware that she was being given LSD?
Yes, I mean, they were told that they would be given some medication, and they
specifically LSD?
Well, we told them, I don't think that they would have even known what LSD was then at the time. They were told that they would be given some medications which might make them feel worse.
Dr. Monroe, what do you think the Army Chemical Corps was looking for in all of this testing?
They were looking for an incapacitating agent, an agent that would not harm the person permanently, but would incapacitate them temporarily. That seemed like a humanistic way to wage a war, if war is necessary.
I wouldn't call it harsh. I would say it was harder on the staff than it was on the patients, because these people had to be fed and they had to be cared for and they had to be given sufficient fluid and food and toileted and so on and so forth. It was a very difficult thing for the staff to follow these patients properly and see that they did well.
What do you think they were looking for?
Well, I think they weren't looking for agents or anything like that.
Yet the agency's perception of the work you were doing, in CIA documents we have examined, it says that the project that was being done here, they intended to use everything learned about the new agents to induce them to, quote, to perform acts of a complex, purposeful nature.
Yeah, but that was never done.
The effects of which may be out of keeping with the individual's previous behavior.
That sort of thing was never done. Those people were not, that was, when they first came here, the first people they sent up to see us, you see, were operational type people from the CIA with some rather wild ideas.
Okay, this is their perception of it, if I could just continue.
No, it wasn't their perception of it either. No, it wasn't
dangerous to his being, contrary to any previous consciously expressed intentions and interests, contrary to the good of the individual, and subversive to the goals for which he is consciously working.
I understand all this talk. But the situation was, you see, those things were never done because of wise people on both sides. We were not able to do this nor interested in it.
They were, though.
Some of the low-level people were, but the high-level people were not.
Dr. Milton Klein, a psychologist, a clinical and experimental hypnotist, and unpaid consultant to the CIA.
The qualifications would be the subject selected to produce the kind of behavior that you wish, the amount of time, the procedures that are utilized, and the motivations of the people who are designing, executing, and administering the procedures. You're asking whether an individual can be, under hypnosis, influenced, coerced, persuaded, shaped to perform an antisocial act, or a destructive act, or an act of violence. My answer would be yes. I would say that most government agencies concerned with intelligence operations have been looking to hypnosis as a tool for a variety of purposes, one of which is to carry out and to execute certain intelligence operations on a basis where they would not have to rely completely on some of their own emotional reactions. Actually,
Would that entail murder?
It could, if you consider that an act of killing someone under circumstances of war is murder. I think one has to define what that means.
Under circumstances of peace.
Under circumstances of peace, it would be murder.
Thank you, sir. In 1977, the Senate subcommittee heard testimony from many of them, but the testimony was not that revealing. According to one of them, they agreed amongst themselves to keep the inquiry within bounds that would satisfy the committee. Former narcotics officer Charles Siragusa says that he was asked to limit his testimony by the man he reported to at the CIA.
He wanted me not to say anything.
To perjure yourself.
That's right. Well, either that, I'd have to perjure myself or take the Fifth Amendment. And I'm not about to take the Fifth Amendment for anybody.
Okay. Former CIA chemist Robert Lashbrook testified he had no first-hand knowledge of the agency-run safe houses, when in fact he supervised one of them. And according to George White's diaries, was at a safe house when White conducted what he called an LSD surprise experiment. Dr. Sidney Gottlieb, whom we recently filmed near his California home, oversaw many of the CIA behavioral programs. He retired in 1973 and destroyed the records of this work. In sort of a valedictory letter, Dr. Gottlieb wrote that he and his colleagues had been able to maintain contact with the leading edge of developments in the field of biological and chemical control of human behavior. Dr. Gottlieb also testified before the Senate subcommittee, but from an anteroom where he could not be filmed because of what his lawyer termed health and cardiac problems. Dr. Gottlieb declined ABC News' request for an interview.
Mr. Letter on MK Ultra. Who's Mr. Letter? If you don't know who Mr. Letter is, go back and read my blog or watch my video entitled The Letter That Shall Not Be Named. I explain it there. You don't have to know who Mr. Letter is to benefit from this blog, because mainly I'm just going to be talking about MK Ultra and different resources for you to look in further and research further if you'd like to know more on the topic. But you know, if it's bugging you when I keep talking about Mr. Letter, what's he talking about? You know, go back and watch that video or read that blog, The Letter That Shall Not Be Named. So just a quick acknowledgement. It was this user who goes by this handle here on Truth Social that inspired me to look into Mr. Letter's posts regarding MK Ultra. It takes a topic that's very difficult to scrunch up and summarize neatly, and sort of wraps it up, at least in a manner that you can begin your journey on this topic and find out everything and more than you ever thought you maybe even wanted to know. So here you can see in this mirror site for Mr. Letter, you do a search query right there for MK Ultra, and these posts should come up, as long as you're dealing with a legitimate mirror site, or you're going to where Mr. Letter posts originally, which he just started posting again, by the way, after about a 2-year pause. So that's kind of interesting. But anyhow, these 4 posts come up, and we're going to be talking about them and the links that are provided. With Mr. Letter's posts, we start with post 772, which was posted February 15, 2018 at 15:02, which would be 3:02 p.m. in military time. And we see this link to a government document talking about MK Ultra, and this is a transcript of a Senate hearing on the topic. You can see right here. These are taken directly from the page at the government website. Project MK Ultra, the CIA's program of research in behavioral modification. So you have these various senators, members of the CIA, and talking about this whole thing here. So this isn't a conspiracy theory, okay? This is an official government document. You can see right there, MK Ultra. They're talking about it. So this is a real thing. This really, the government admitted that they did this, that this was happening. So Senator Daniel K. Inouye said, "It should be made clear from the outset that in general, we are focusing on events that happened over 12 or as long as 25 years ago. it should be emphasized that the programs that are of greatest concern have stopped. Well, who decides what's of greatest concern? I mean, we're talking about projects that were conducted on unwitting civilians. I mean, it's horrible. It's as horrible. It's just talk about a violation of trust. The purpose of these hearings is supposed to regain the trust of the American people. So when you say things like the programs of greatest concern have stopped, I mean, what, define a program of lesser concern and tell me who makes that decision. You know, are there any civilians involved in these decisions? I mean, Senator Edward M. Kennedy said, these are questions that happened in the 50s and 60s and go back some 15, 20 years ago. So again, this was in 1977. So, you know, the 50s and 60s weren't that long ago. I mean, there were still plenty of people alive at this time that this hearing occurred that were involved in these projects. Admiral Stansfield Turner, Director of Central Intelligence, said, "Let me emphasize that the MKUltra events are 12 to 25 years in the past. I assure you that the CIA is in no way engaged in either witting or unwitting testing of drugs today." You know, so we're just supposed to take his word for it. I mean, they lied to us, you know, about all of this and covered things up. And then we're just supposed to trust them when they say they haven't done it anymore. I mean, they're basically, you know, relying upon the naive trust that we, the people, put in these institutions. They're taking that for granted. They're saying like, oh, well, you know, you trust us. We're an up and up establishment. And so if we tell you that we're not doing it anymore, you're just supposed to believe us, even though we completely lied to you not so long ago and toyed with you like guinea pigs and, you know, probably killed all kinds of people that we'll never hear about. So basically, the conclusion I came to by reading this, and you can read it yourself and you can decide what you think, this is all just damage control to avoid accountability from anyone. It almost seems like they're trying to protect the perpetrators of these incidences. Here's Richard Helms. He served as the Director of Central Intelligence from 1966 to 1973. He ordered the destruction of all MKUltra documents in 1973. In 1977, he received a 2-year suspended sentence. If you look up what a suspended sentence is, that's not necessarily, you know, time in jail. It's a suspended sentence and $2,000 fine. $2,000 was a lot more in 1977 than it is today, but still, it's not very much when you consider what he did. He destroyed all these documents. I mean, you know, you saw just a peek into how these projects ruin people's lives, and we really have no idea the extent of the damage. And this guy destroyed all the documents, and he, you know, it's kind of like a slap on the wrist. And here's Gottlieb. He's the one who gave LSD to that Dr. Frank Olson, the one whose widow we saw in the video. And, you know, his video, as you saw, was his hearing was kept behind closed doors. You know, he refused to be interviewed by CBS when they approached him. I mean, this is one of those guys that just hides. You know, you can see how he hides behind closed doors. He doesn't want to face any accountability. You know, you go to the Wikipedia page and it makes it sound like he's this great guy who was all into health and stuff. But I mean, he was basically like on the level of Dr. Mengele, you know, from the Nazi death camps. Gottlieb administered LSD and other hallucinogenic drugs to unwitting subjects and financed psychiatric research and development of techniques that would crush the human psyche to the point that it would admit anything. He was named as the person who gave Army bacteriologist Frank Olson LSD at an MKUltra retreat, leading to Olson's mental spiral and death a week later. On October 7, 1975, Gottlieb testified before the church committee under the alias Joseph Schneider. He did not reveal much in his testimony besides saying he had destroyed nearly all records of what he did during his time at the agency. Gottlieb was never convicted of any crimes. Right, so Senator Kennedy says, and no single individual could be found who remembered the details, not the director of the CIA who ordered the documents destroyed, not the official responsible for the program, nor any of his associates. Well, isn't that convenient that they couldn't remember anything? These institutes, these individuals, have a right to know who they are and how and when they were used. As of today, the agency itself refuses to declassify the names of those institutions and individuals, quite appropriately, I might say, with regard to the individuals under the Privacy Act. So this is all about protecting the institutions and the doctors and the individuals who facilitated all these horrible projects on unwitting civilians. This is all about protecting them. The Nazis. What did the Nazi soldiers say in Nuremberg? A lot of them said, "I was just following orders. It wasn't me. I'm not guilty. I'm just an unwitting participant myself." They try to make the perpetrators out to be victims. Well, what about the actual victims? What about them? Many researchers, distinguished researchers, some of our most outstanding members of our scientific community involved in this network now really do not know whether they were involved or not. So again, this is all about avoiding accountability. If they didn't know they were involved, if they didn't know that making someone, sleep, forcing someone to sleep by using drugs, putting them to sleep for a month at a time and putting all kinds of drugs into their veins and giving them LSD and shock treatment, but they didn't know what they were doing. They were just innocent victims themselves. Admiral Turner said, "We should certainly assume that the researchers and institutions which cooperated with CIA on a witting basis acted in good faith and in the belief that they were aiding their government in a legitimate and proper purpose." We should certainly assume that, huh? Well, why should we assume that? Maybe some of these doctors were just sociopaths that just, didn't have any empathy for the people that they were doing this to. What about that possibility, huh? They want to frame the context very firmly. They want to provide guardrails for us not to think outside of. Let's just assume that the researchers and institutions, acted in good faith. Let's just assume that, okay? Wink, wink. I believe that we all have a moral obligation to these researchers and institutions to protect them from any unjustified embarrassment or damage to their reputations, which revelation of their identities might bring. Now, I am cherry picking these quotes, I will admit, but if you go through and you read that entire transcript and you measure, these statements about how they need to protect the institutions and the unwitting doctors, if you take all that information and weigh it against what's being said about the victims, I think you'll find that there's a lot more attention being paid towards protecting these perpetrators from any unjustified embarrassment, which should tell you everything you need to know. Is they don't care that they did this. They don't want to apologize. They're not really apologizing at all. They're just twisting it all to say, they're making victims out of the perpetrators. You see? So this is really quite horrible when you really think about it.
There he is. There's the beast. Oh my gosh. Look at that car that just came out of the woods. That car right there just drove out of the woods. What? Are you serious? Yes.
So let's look back again at post 772. We already looked at this link with the transcript hearing there, which Mr. Lero tells us read very carefully. And then right about here starts to talk about that video we just saw, which is linked right here. And it says unreleased, classified highest. Now, how would Mr. Letter have access to information that's classified at the highest level? Well, you've got to go back and watch my blog, The Letter That Shall Not Be Named, or read the written version. And I explain it all there. I'm not going to explain it again here. Ability to use frequencies, incoming signal, modify, code, program over X period. Designate mobile phone to control target subject. OP, operator conducted, I believe that stands for operator, originating outside of US. Car control, question mark. So Mr. Letter, as I translate this, is telling us that there is technology whose existence is highly classified to control cars using a cell phone for an X period of time. Or at least Mr. Letter is asking us to consider whether this is possible. You know, cars are so computerized now, every aspect of them. I wouldn't be surprised at all if this technology is available. Then down here it says, statement by driver, fairy tale, as the world turns. This is bigger than anyone can imagine. So, yeah, that would be pretty big news, wouldn't it? If, you know, some nefarious individuals outside of the country can somehow tap into your cell phone and, you know, take control of your car or who knows what else. I mean, that would be a big deal. We'd want to know about that, right? So here's an article by ky3.com covering this incident, published back on August 31st, 2017. Driver of car crashing near presidential motorcade is talking. It was terrifying. The guy who shot the video said, I mean, the location and timing are pretty ironic if it was accidental. So, said Clayton Hefner, who shot video of incident. So it sounds like Clayton Hefner doesn't necessarily believe that that was just a coincidence. Sounds like Clayton Hefner, like any rational human being who saw the video, would wonder, was that done on purpose? Was this an attempt to ram, you know, the president's vehicle? You know, we can't prove that that's why the car was there, but you'd have to be a moron not to at least consider it and do an investigation into that, because that's a pretty big deal. Who are these people driving this car? How did they end up there? What are they doing there if it was an accident? Samantha Morris, 17, and Nikia Hicks, 18, were in that car on their way to work when their brakes suddenly went out. I was pumping my brakes hard. They were smoking, and I couldn't stop at all, said Morris. That's when she swerved to avoid hitting a guard at the entrance of her work and ended up feet from a pond. I just thought we'd hit a fence, said Morris. I thought there was a fence. We were crazy close to that pond. We could have drowned. So, who are these people? What do we know about them? I mean, the article tells us nothing about them except that they were teens and they were scared. The article does not ask the question, not for 1 second, that these individuals might have been questionable. Their test doesn't question their testimony at all. Look where they ended up, and look how close they came to possibly ramming the president. I mean, well, maybe they're telling the truth, but maybe they're lying. We have to look into this. This is because attempting to assassinate a president, which is what one angle you could take on this very logically, you know, that's something very serious that needs to be considered. But the article just basically disregards that entire angle and sort of makes these drivers appear like victims. They were surrounded by Secret Service agents who, they say, combed their car for anything dangerous. They found no threat, confirmed their brakes went out, and let them go. How did they confirm that the brakes went out so quickly? I mean, and even if they did confirm that the brakes went out, how did they go out? You know, you need to know that. Was it some crazy technology that made them go out? Did someone rig their brakes wrong? Did the last guy who worked on their car do a bad job? I mean, there's no detail, and that's a key detail to this whole thing, because if there's no logical explanation as to how their brakes went out, I mean, we need to question their story. We need to get some solid facts here. The Springfield police chief says there was no malintent. How did he come to that conclusion? There's no detail. Just an untimely, unfortunate coincidence, said Chief Williams. It's almost like they don't want to pursue any other angles, and they just want to close the case as quickly as possible. Then it talks about how Hefner is cashing in on the video. The New York Post paid him $700 plus 70% of any future profits for the video. So what? What's your point? ky3.com. What's your point that he's cashing in? Is there something wrong with that? Sorry if you are mad that I'm making money off of it, but I have. So, said Hefner. Okay, so, you know, again, we're supposed to think there's something wrong with this? Like this guy's an asshole or something? Why? The teens aren't mad about the money, but the threats and remarks from people who still think they tried to harm the President of the United States. I got extremely angry that people now think I'm a bad person because one 21-year-old guy decided a YouTube video was more important than my life and my safety, said Morris. So look, they're making a big deal out of this. They're making a victim out of Morris. The article is trying to make us sympathetic to Morris, and trying to get us to think that this Hefner guy is a total asshole. What about the possibility that Morris and the other girl in the car threatened the president, by almost ramming his motorcade? What about that? The article is obviously geared towards shifting our idea of who the victim might be and who the bad guy might be here. The bad guy is the guy who filmed it, right? The good guy is the person driving the car. You see the switcheroo they do? It's all very psychological, and you can take out 10 headline articles a day from New York Times or anywhere, dismantle the psychology behind a lot of these articles, and these are the kind of things you find. These are the types of details that they don't want you discussing. This is why they have to make us all clowns and conspiracy theorists. And I mean, these girls say they were scared they were going to drown in this pond here. I mean, does that look like a pond? I mean, I guess it's water draining into a gutter. I mean, they're speaking about it like it's this body of water that's going to swallow them up. I mean, I don't know. The whole thing's just kind of questionable. And, Mr. Letter is asking the question, is this a fairy tale? I think it's a fair question to ask. I think it's an important question to ask. 3, posted on February 15th, 2018 at 3:13, has a link to CIA activities in Canada. Now this link, you can see there's a space between the / and the EN. I don't know why it's formatted that way, but it won't load for that reason if you click on it on this particular mirror site. So you can just copy and paste it and then backspace that, or just go on Wikipedia, CIA activities in Canada. It should come up pretty quick. So this talks about the MKUltra project that was exported to Canada. And a Lincoln Park, Calgary military base is mentioned. Lincoln Park was like a neighborhood on the base there at Calgary military that I guess was somehow tied into the MKUltra, which is interesting when just to digress slightly for a moment, when you think of the band Linkin Park, Linkin, and Chester Bennington's questionable death on his friend Chris Cornell's birthday, which occurred the same year that Chris Cornell died. Apparently, they were both working on some kind of film on children being trafficked or something like that. So, that's a whole can of worms that a lot of people have been looking into, but it's really hard to get some straight facts on some of that stuff. But I just thought that was interesting to mention in this context. The CIA convinced the Allen Memorial Institute to allow a series of mind control tests on 9 patients in the Montreal school as part of their ongoing Project MKUltra. The experiments were exported to Canada when the CIA recruited Scottish psychiatrist Donald Ewan Cameron, creator of the psychic driving concept, which the CIA found particularly interesting. Cameron had been hoping to correct schizophrenia by erasing existing memories and reprogramming the psyche. He commuted from Albany, New York, to Montreal every week and was paid $69,000 from 1957 to 1964 to carry out MKUltra experiments there. In addition to LSD, Cameron also experimented with various paralytic drugs, as well as electroconvulsive therapy at 30 to 40 times the normal power. His driving experiments consisted of putting subjects into drug-induced coma for weeks at a time, up to 3 months in one case, while playing tape loops of noise or simple repetitive statements. His experiments were typically carried out on patients who had entered the institute for minor problems such as anxiety disorders and postpartum depression, many of whom suffered permanently from his actions. His treatments resulted in victims' incontinence, amnesia, forgetting how to talk, forgetting their parents, and thinking their interrogators were their parents. Look at how long ago this was, okay? This was in 1957 and 1964. We really have to take seriously the idea that they didn't stop doing this, okay? The only reason why they started talking about it was because it got too hot, too much got out, and they had to have their Senate hearing there where almost nobody was prosecuted, and you got to think of these mass shootings that keep occurring and these crazy kids, these crazy people where their minds are just wacko. If you just eliminate the possibility that any of this was involved, that someone was getting into their head and messing with their heads and reprogramming them in some way to, Manchurian candidate style or what have you, it is extremely, one of the most dangerous things I think about the ignorance of modern Americans is that they just don't consider any of this here, that this is ever a factor in any of these shootings. And, you know, if you present me a story that is completely insane, where somebody just for no reason at all went into a concert, just shot a bunch of people for no reason, no motive, I mean, I'm going to go, well, hold on a minute. That doesn't make any, there has to be a motive. There has to be a reason why somebody did this. People don't just go berserk for no freaking reason. Okay, there's always a reason. So here's Dr. Ewan Cameron. Died in 1967, never faced any charges. Now, $69,000 may not sound like a lot over the course of that many years, but back then, it was actually a lot more money than it is today. So that's important to take into account. And Dr. Cameron was also involved in the Nuremberg trials. He was invited for a psychiatric evaluation of Rudolf Hess. How ironic is that? When lawsuits commenced in 1986, the Canadian government denied having any knowledge that Cameron was being sponsored by the CIA. And then here's 4 links. So the first link in that post there that we just looked at, I believe it's a dead link, but I believe it's supposed to go here to this video, which here's the address right here at cbc.ca, which I took some of that footage at the beginning of the video from this. Very disturbing, but very well done back when you could actually see real journalism on TV sometimes. And here's that guy, Bob Logie, that we saw at the beginning of the video, who's obviously damaged for the rest of his life. I don't know how he ended up, but I'm sure he's long gone now. But all of that happened when he was 18 years old, and look how damaged he is. So many years later, people's lives were thoroughly ruined, destroyed by this. Just think, look at his eyes. Just think what they can do to people. You know, these are just people that were victims, sort of guinea pig experiments. Just think what they could do to, you know, take someone who's an asshole or someone who's crazy or someone who's violent. Just think about what they could turn someone like that into. This is just the tip of the iceberg that we're seeing here. The next link goes to an article about Trudeau government gag order in CIA brainwashing case silences victims, lawyer says. This is recent. This is from December 15, 2017. So some of the victims and their families, their sons and daughters, are still trying to get justice through the courts, and they're still being blocked. The third link goes to a New York Times article talking about the legal cases, and here's some bullet points of what the victims were subjected to. Really horrible stuff. In the 1980s, the CIA and State Department launched a public counterattack on the Canadian government for questioning the propriety of CIA activities. In press briefings, interviews, and court pleadings, the CIA hammered away at one theme: Canada funded Cameron too. This steady counterattack left the Canadian government completely cowed, apparently a fairly easy thing for the U.S. to accomplish. So, you know, it sounds like Canada is in total cooperation with the U.S. Regarding these clandestine activities, and has been for some time. The fifth link goes to a 2012 article detailing a bit more about the history behind MKUltra Subproject 58. After the links in that post, Mr. Letter says, have any recent shooters received therapy in the past? Be the artist we know you are. You were chosen for a specific reason. So I'm going to recommend, actually, if you really want to get into this, go to this guy's webpage right here. Hopefully you can see that. There's his name down there too. If you go to this webpage, I don't want to say it because I don't want to get censored by YouTube because I believe this guy was banned by YouTube. And click on this right here, see? And then go to the videos, okay? And he has a video where he takes apart every single one of Mr. Letter's posts. And if you go to this one here, for February 17, 2018, he speaks about this post and a few others. And in the post, he brings up a very scary but important article that one of the followers of Mr. Letter dug up. And it's on WND.com here from 2018. And it says, media ignoring one crucial factor in Florida school shooting. Guns, depression, trouble cited, but key information not yet disclosed. So basically, you know, what role do pharmaceuticals play in these mass shootings? We always hear about the guns and stuff and the political ideologies, but we never hear about these hardcore pharmaceuticals. Now, I'm not going to cite the figure right now, but I know the figure for people dying of pharmaceuticals is alarmingly high, a lot higher than it is for gun deaths. And we're not banning pills, are we? We're not banning the pharmaceutical industry. All right. In the case of Nicholas Cruz, the 19-year-old Florida mass shooter, his mother's sister, Barbara Kombatovich, told the Miami Herald that she believed Cruz was on medication to deal with his emotional fragility. And it talks about these different shooters who are on these different medications that, they just don't mention. In fact, a disturbing number of perpetrators of school shootings and similar mass murderers in our modern era were either on or just recently coming off of psychiatric medications. A few of the most high-profile examples, out of many others, include Columbine mass shooter killer Eric Harrison was taking Luvox, like Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, Effexor, and many others, a modern and widely prescribed type of antidepressant drug called selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. Patrick Purdy went on a schoolyard shooting rampage in Stockton, California in 1989. Had been on amitriptyline, an antidepressant, as well as the antipsychotic drug Thorazine. Kip Kinkle, 15, murdered his parents in 1998, and the next day went to his school, Thurston High in Springfield, Oregon, and opened fire on his classmates, killing 2 and wounding 22 others. He'd been prescribed both Prozac and Ritalin. There's a bunch of examples. They're all terrible. And if you remember, Chris Cornell, they did make a big deal about the Ativan that was in his system, which he didn't really take enough to be significant, but I think it is worth noting, and that his own father was a pharmacist. Post 777 has a comment from an anonymous poster who follows Mr. Letter, and Mr. Letter responded to that comment with this here, asking, why is Big Pharma essential? Expand your thinking past cures. So you think about the psychological profile of a lot of these, mass shooters and mass murderers, and you look at what pharmaceuticals they took. And I think Mr. Letter is saying, obviously these people aren't getting cured for whatever mental illness they have. In fact, is it making them worse? Are the pharmaceuticals actually intentionally being used to cause these people to become these ticking time bombs? You think way back to the 50s to what Ewan Cameron was doing, and psychic driving and trying to erase people's minds and implant new things, and it's not very hard to imagine what they've been doing all these years up to this point. I think there was a really crappy Batman movie a few years back, maybe in the 90s, where there was some conspiracy that the Penguin or something like that was putting something in the water, and then putting something in deodorant, and then putting something in toothpaste products, so that whatever was making people sick was only detected if you combined all 3 of those together, you see. So in fictional movies and fictional books, we sometimes get a hint of what's actually going on in reality. In this case, the combination perhaps of pharmaceuticals and maybe some social conditioning, and even possible cell phone technology, different frequencies being broadcast, which we go back to the electroshock treatment. Electricity and different frequencies can affect brain waves in our mind, and can even change our mood, and perhaps even drive people to become violent. Think Google new Pixel phone. Think Apple versus Samsung. Why was BlackBerry destroyed? Good things to research. I don't know much about these phones. I know there's a big story behind BlackBerry, and I really don't know much about it. But one thing that occurred to me was that perhaps BlackBerry couldn't accommodate the technology that, for whatever reason, that big tech wanted to implement with regard to what we're talking about here. We can guide, but you must organically uncover the truth. They are watching. Archive everything offline. So I guess Mr. Letter is warning us that some of this information that we find might be very sensitive, and you don't want to have your stuff out there online where it can be found, and someone may not like that. Mr. Letter didn't post again about MK Ultra until January 7th of 2019. I guess that would be just before the pandemic hit. And it starts out with this article from The Sun. Talks about new documents released under the Freedom of Information Act reveal how the CIA experimented on both humans and animals using drugs, hypnosis, and electronic devices as part of the top secret and illegal mind control project MKUltra. So, although a lot of the documents were destroyed, things are still coming out. Shockingly, the swaths of information still missing or redacted in the records could mean the CIA is still carrying out the experiments to this day, according to experts. Of course. Why would they stop? As I said, there was no accountability. Criminals awaiting trial held in a prison hospital ward in a bid to develop improved techniques in drug interrogation. I mean, it's nuts what's going on out there that we just don't know about. We wonder why people are losing their minds, why all these shootings are happening. I mean, we got to consider this stuff. The best thing to do if you want to look at up to date what the most recent files are, go to this place, the Black Vault, theblackvault.com, I think it is. This guy here has been pulling Freedom of Information documents for years and years and years. He's, I think, the authority at this point. You wouldn't believe how many documents there are now. It's very tedious going through them, because a lot of information is redacted. But if you really want to get to the bottom of this and help bring this subject to light to the public, go in there and dig through there and see what you can find. They were implanting electronic devices into animals to see whether electronic impulses can essentially control the brain. And now they're trying to do it on people. You see, they start doing it on animals first, and then they try to do it on people. Program developed ongoing under offshore, not domestic, tangent agency. Covert funding, animals to humans. Humans 1988, 71% average success rate. Targeted mental criteria designated as blank. Mental institutions and therapists to program specialists. Cocktail regimen, 4 times daily brain intercept administered by, and then there's this article here which talks about brain implants. And before moving on to that, I just want you to think about how they really want you to take this shot, and you know what shot I'm talking about. You cannot trust these people, okay? These types of shots typically take many, many years to develop, and there's good reason for that, because you got to make sure they're safe. You can't just whip things up as fast as they did. And people are dropping like flies, and the media is all over suppressing this stuff. So I just wanted to throw that out there. So this article here goes to a National Institute of Health article about converting brain signals into action. And they frame it this way: the problem has always been the control of the prosthetic by someone with limited ability to move. So they're presenting this technology as something that will help people with, missing limbs and a prosthetic, or, people who are paralyzed. They're presenting it as something that's going to help people, okay? One of these, the micro electrocorticography, or ECOG, electrode grid, is placed beneath the skull and on the surface of the brain's movement controlling motor cortex. A computer system intercepts the electrical impulses in the brain captured by the micro ECOG technology and then converts the signals into movement controls in virtual environments. You see where this is going? I mean, it all sounds very benevolent, but what happens when this research gets turned to control people and get them to, say, involuntarily do something like commit a crime, commit a murder? And all of the research and all these companies that are sponsoring it, everything's on the up and up. If they had a secret project happening in unison with this, if that was part of the same plan, this would all be the cover for it. No one would think there's anything nefarious. No one would assume there's anything nefarious going on. So the money would just pour in, and they could be doing their secret ops beneath it all. WIA military personnel targets of the program: PTSD plus, people with PTSD. Clandestine black ops to zero affiliation non-stick. something out of a movie, fiction, the hole is deep. You know, they present a lot of this stuff as fiction in movies and such, and so we sort of think it's absurd and it's never going to happen, and next thing you know, it's happening and it's not fiction anymore. Visit me on Rumble, a newer streaming platform, rumble.com. If you go there and look for my handle, Joe Gilmore without the E, go ahead and subscribe and like and share my material.